One day, King David was walking around the roof of his palace and saw a woman bathing in her home. Her name was Bathsheba, the wife of a soldier named Uriah, who was off fighting in the war. David thought she was beautiful and sent his messengers to get her. They brought her to him, and David and Bathsheba slept with one another. Shortly after, Bathsheba sent word to David that she was pregnant with David's child. To hide what he had done, David quickly devised a plan. He called Uriah back from the war, hoping that he would sleep with Bathsheba, and it would look like he had gotten her pregnant. But when Uriah came home, he slept on a mat outside his house because he didn't want to disrespect his fellow soldiers still at war by living comfortably while he was at home. So David came up with another plan. He sent Uriah back to the battlefield and instructed the commander to put Uriah on the front lines of battle, where he was most likely to be killed. And that's exactly what happened. Shortly after, David married Bathsheba, and she gave birth to their son. But God was unhappy with David and sent Nathan to tell him a story. There were two men, one rich and one poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb who was like a child to him. Now a guest comes to the home of the rich man, but instead of taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal, the rich man steals the poor man's one sheep and kills it. David was furious. "This man must die for what he has done," David said. Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man." David immediately realized how wrong he had been and confessed to Nathan and to God all of the things he had done. Even though God forgave David, there were still terrible consequences because of his actions. David and Bathsheba's infant son became sick and died. Then, years later, their second son, Absalom, did something no one, even David, expected. He gathered an army together to overthrow his father as king. Before the battle began, David gave instructions to his soldiers not to kill Absalom. But during the battle, Absalom was riding a mule under the thick branches of a large oak tree, and his hair got caught in the tree, leaving him hanging as the mule rode away. One of David's commanders, Joab, found Absalom, and despite David's instructions, he and his soldiers drove their spears through Absalom and killed him. Because of this, David was heartbroken, wishing that it had been him who died instead of his son. Even after these tragedies, David continued to worship God. He had not forgotten about God's promise to one day build the temple. So David told his son, Solomon, that he was to start building it. In his final days as king, David led the Israelites in worship of God for all of the ways that God had helped them and provided for them over the years. Then, shortly before his death, David handed over his kingship to Solomon.
David had some troubling things in his life. Sin was a part of his life. I had a sin-filled day yesterday. That always stops and breathing. Let me tell you about my sin-filled day yesterday. I woke up, and right after I woke up, I scratched my eyes, and I couldn't open my eye for over an hour. Eyes are not meant to be closed. They're meant to see. Later in the morning, I took a walk down to Ridley Park near my house, and there's this enormous eucalyptus tree that had fallen over in the night, ripped all the roots out, it was all rotten underneath. It was a tree that was dead. Trees are not meant to die in that way. I saw a guy who was riding his bike, got a flat tire, fixing his tires. Tires are not meant to be flat. I heard an ambulance drive down the street. Somebody was sick. People are not meant to be sick. The world is a broken, sin-filled place. And some of it we do. And some of it just is broken. But it all has an impact on us. It all changes us. How has it changed you? Because I suspect it has. We're going to look at that for a few minutes today, but would you begin with a prayer? Gracious Lord, we are your people. And we have a foot in this earth that surrounds us with a swirl of sin that changes us. And we have a foot in your kingdom, which is a completely different world of promise, where sin no longer is. But Lord, while we have feet in both, remind us that we are ultimately yours, and that sin has no power over our future. We ask you to remind us of that, Lord. I say this in Jesus' name. Amen. The sin of the world is everywhere. It has pushed us and pulled us and tempted us and drawn us in and distorted our relationship with our God and distorted our relationship with each other. And I want to look at 4 different places that sin of the world may have taken you. I want to look at 4 places you may have ended up because of that. And ask you, do any of these sound familiar to you? Or for people that you know and love? The first place is full of people who just don't know or who are indifferent to God. People who just don't care. Now maybe your first impression is these are seething, ugly, dangerous-looking people, and they might be. But as often as not, these are very regular people that you meet every day. They may be the neighbor next door who is kind and thoughtful and gentle and who lives by the golden rule. And is sometimes happy and sometimes sad and sometimes content and sometimes not content. But for the most part, just like the rest of us. These people see the brokenness of the world and they know that they are not perfect themselves. And so they absolve themselves of this by doing good things sometimes. Maybe they're crack dealers and they sell their crack and then they buy Christmas presents for their kids. Maybe they're country club golfers and they give money to the symphony or to the homeless shelter. They balance off the bad stuff in their life with the good stuff, and in that way they're alike. Their hope is in themselves. And their hope and their knowledge is of right now and today. But sin has pushed them into a common place together, and that common place is separate from their Creator. Totally separate from God. They don't know Him. And they may never know Him. But He has words for these people. Our Lord has words for these people. He says, I am God, and I care about you. And when you can't take care of yourself, I can care about you and take care of you. I have hope for you today and tomorrow. Let's talk about that. Then there's a second group of people. These are people who know God, But they know him on their own terms. They may have grown up in the church and don't care about it anymore. They may still be very active in churches. If they don't go anymore, it's because those churches are full of hypocrites, and I'm not going to do that. Or somebody said something very mean to me there once, or I don't need church, I can go for a walk in the woods and know God. Or if they are part of church, they're part of churches because their friends are there, and it's the place to hang out, and my mom would be mad at me if I didn't go to church, and other reasons like that. They know of God, but they don't know Him. They want God on their terms, not His terms. And they may know Him, but they don't trust Him. Now this is what we saw in King Saul a couple of weeks ago. Saul began as a devoted man of God, but then eventually began to walk away from that relationship and become someone who had God on his own terms. And God said, I made you king, and you are no longer to be king. God would let that type of man lead his people. So God sent him away because Saul walked away from that relationship. 1,000 years later, the disciples sat at Jesus' feet and said, tell us what the end times are like. And Jesus said, in these times, many will fall away. We are at the end times. Saul is a good example of those who have fallen away. Our Lord knows the hearts and minds of these people, and He cares. And what does He say to them? He says, Hey, remember me? I'm still God. I'm still good. I'm still trustworthy. And I am still here for you. Come back. I miss you. Sin drives people to another group. This third group is different from the second, and this third group knows God, and they trust God, and they love God, oftentimes dearly. They value His Word, they value His promises, and they see the sin in the world, and they know about it. And they know that they are part of it. And they know it because they've experienced it and they have some guilt about that. And they carry that sin as a burden. Something in their past, an abuse they created, a person they negated, a relationship they vacated, defines them. They may not even know it, but it does define them. Maybe not on the surface, but it tells them who they are. And they say to themselves, if only I had been a better parent, a better person, a better friend. If only I had taken that job. If only I had not done that thing. But I did. And it's mine. And it's who I am. And God tells me I'm forgiven for it, but it's who I am. And I'm ashamed of it. It's so easy to be in this group. And the evil one knows that. And Satan whispers into the ears of this group soft and deadly words, saying things like, oh, it's just too bad you let that happen. This will always be with you, and that's just such a shame. Hopefully, God will someday quit being angry at you, but boy, that was a bad thing you did. Maybe He really won't be able to forgive that. But the Lord's heart breaks for these people. He longs to take that burden, that weight that holds them down, and take it on himself. He hurts for those that hold on to those things and steep themselves with a sense of shame they cannot let go. His heart breaks. And what does he say to these people? He says, if you say you have no sin, you're deceiving yourselves. You're not looking at the truth. So confess your sin to me. Tell me about it. And I am faithful and I am fair and I will take it from you. I will take all of it from you and I will take it forever. Give it to me and be free of it. Then there's this last group. These people are sinners. They are fallen from grace for certain. They are imperfect and broken people. But they're people who understand that God does not want our sin to be an identity of condemnation. He does not want us to sit condemned. These people understand that sin has marred and affected them. They know that they may be responsible for some terrible and ugly things in their past. And they accept that they are sinners and can do nothing about it. But what makes them different than the last group is that they know the sins of their past do not define them. They know that God completely covers their history and that that history does not determine who they are. They embrace an identity that is not based on what they did, but on who God is and who God tells them they are. This is the man that David is. This is why they called David a man after God's heart. Because David was a guy that did some bad things. He was a schemer. He was a guy who desired something that wasn't his, Bathsheba. And then he went to all lengths to get it. He's a murderer. He's an adulterer. He's a destroyer of families and people and relationships. And yet David stands in his identity knowing that he did these things, but that his identity doesn't come from that. It comes from what God had done for him by telling him that he is forgiven. David accepts he's a sinner, but then he finds the courage to not live in that shame. He trusts that God will make him more than a summary of his bad deeds. Remember when I was in Michigan, met a pastor who had a congregation of recovery ministry. And we went to worship one Saturday evening with 100, 150 people who were praising and worshiping and an enormous gratitude for being able to be a part of this community of addicts. And I said, how did you do this? I mean, this is really beautiful thing you're doing. And he said, it's because I'm one of them. And I don't remember his circumstances, but he was a young guy, 30 years old. He had been in jail. He had been an addict. He had lost his marriage. He had lost his job. He was homeless. He was one of them. And he described this what sounds like a horrible past he has, but he described it with a sense of distance from it. It was there. It was his. But it didn't define who he was. Because who he was somebody who was forgiven for that, and now new and separate and clean of it. I was really impressed. I was really touched by him. Where has sin pushed you? Where have you ended up from what you have done and not done, and what the world has done to you? And what does God say to you? Does he say, hey, I am God. I have hope to give you today and tomorrow. Let's talk about that. Does he say, hey, remember me? I'm still here. I'm still here for you. Come back. Does he say, confess that sin to me? Give it to me and let me take it. For it doesn't have to be your burden anymore. You're free of that burden. Whatever you hear him saying, hear this as well. He says, no matter how much sin swirls around you, no matter how much it tugs on your life and pulls at you, no matter who you have become because of it, no matter what you think you are due to it, you are mine. And I love you. That is your identity. That alone. I pray you hear those words. And I pray your heart, like David's, becomes a heart after our Lord. May the peace that passes all understanding guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.